And they insisted that we should be sharing that with the entire congregation, since they mostly Americans in the choir, and since we have many Americans out here, the significance of the piece of music we're going to be singing. So I'm going to take just a few moments to do this. So there will actually be 3 messages today. This is the 3rd message. So. The piece of music we're going to sing is by a famous Italian composer whose name is Giuseppe Verdi. Isn't that a wonderful sound? Yeah, it's much better than English, Joe Green. But anyway, Giuseppe Verdi. In the 1840s, Italy was not a nation as yet. And we in the U.S. have a little bit of a trouble with this concept because our nation, of course, has always been one nation, separate from Europe. It's a whole different idea than what European history is. Italy was not a nation. It was a vassal state. It was simply part of the Austrian Empire at that point. And of course, as with all the nations who were under oppression in those times, they were looking for independence. They were looking for freedom. They were actually looking to what the United States of America had done, and they were all longing for the same thing. Of course, it was a very dangerous thing to state those sort of things publicly. So Verdi, in the 1840s, decided to write an opera based on the story of the captivity of the Jews in Babylon. And the opera was called Nabucco, which is Nebuchadnezzar. So it's a story of the Jews in captivity in Nebuchadnezzar. And as a focal point, near the end of the opera, he had this chorus, which we know in English as the chorus of the Hebrew slaves. Verdi called it Coro di Schiavi Ebrei, which is basically the same thing. And the Italians know it by its opening few words, va pensiero. And so this piece of music is actually a paraphrase of Psalm 137. By the waters of Babylon, we sat down, we hung our harps. And so the idea was that since it was not permissible to state openly defiance to the Habsburg Empire, then what they did was they put this tune, they put this chorus out there, or Verdi he arranged this chorus, and he wrote it so that it was very singable, and so that everybody would hear it and immediately catch on to it and start singing it. And it was very successful. They say that at the initial rehearsals, that people heard it even before it went public, and they heard this, and they started, even the janitors started singing along, and took it out into the streets, and people started singing this. Now, of course, the beauty of this is that it could go out, and everybody could catch on to this tune, and yet Verdi would not get into any trouble. He was not inviting trouble because, after all, he could simply say, oh, well, I didn't mean anything by this. It's a story, it's just a song, and besides, it's about something that happened a long time ago. But of course, everybody knew what the real message was, and that was that we were being oppressed by a foreign power, and we wish we could have our own land back. It's that sort of an idea. And so, at the first performance, of course, people were already singing the music, including the Austrian guards that were standing on watch, with much to the displeasure of their commanders, because it was such a catchy tune. It was so inviting that everybody wanted to do it. One other thing, and so it became sort of a propaganda piece, and so it's very near and dear to the hearts of the Italian people. Those of us from Britain might think of Land of Hope and Glory, except it's much more important to the Italian people than Land of Hope and Glory. Those of us from America might think of America the Beautiful, but again, this is has much deeper meaning for the Italians than that. Just one other thing before we actually sing it. Most people know that another famous composer, George Frederick Handel, wrote a piece of music called the Hallelujah Chorus. And in Britain, when that was first performed in front of King George, it is known that at that point, King George actually stood at the presence he stood when that chorus was sung, because he knew he was in the presence of a king who was higher than himself. He knew he was in the presence of a higher king. I mention this because at the first performance that the Austrian emperor attended of Nabucco, when they got to this chorus that we will be singing, the Austrian emperor took his chair and he turned it around and faced the back wall, because to show his displeasure, because he knew exactly what the real message was, even though he couldn't arrest anybody for it. So he faced the back wall during this chorus of the Hebrew slaves. So, with that, the choir will be singing the chorus of the Hebrew slaves, or Va Pensiero, by Giuseppe Verdi. And we're going to sing this twice, so don't give us an applause after the first performance. We will be singing it again a second time in a special way. I'll just say that. We'll be singing it again in a special way the second time. And I will be directing it. David Hoover will be directing the choir. And it will be accompanied on the piano, pianoforte, by David Hepworth. So now, Coro di Schiavi by Giuseppe Verdi.